Hi, I'm Amanda Yallop.
And I'm Huon Hooke.
And this is The Real Review. The wine we're tasting today is the Perrier-Jouët Belle Époque, vintage 2012.
So this wine is one of the most recognisable prestige wines of Champagne, obviously because of that beautiful bottle. Perrier-Jouët is an old house. It's more than 200 years old, and it's been owned by Pernod Ricard, which is one of the world's biggest drinks companies. Also owns, of course, Jacobs Creek in Australia. It's been owned by them since 2005. This wine is slightly unusual in that it's got some Pinot Meunier in it. Most of the deluxe cuvées in Champagne don't have any Pinot Meunier. Kruggen is the exception, of course. But this one has 5%, and the rest of it is 50% Chardonnay and 45% Pinot Noir. And Hervé Deschamps, who is the chef de cave there, likes to describe Perrier-Jouët as being a Chardonnay-driven house. So it's that style that they're looking for, that finesse, that liveliness, that crispness, that freshness. And I think this wine has that.
Well, it's 50% Chardonnay. And, you know, one of the components of when you're talking about Chardonnay, whether it's a vintage champagne or whether you're talking about non-vintage wines, is Chardonnay actually ages slower in the bottle than any other grape. Pinot Meunier actually ages, it doesn't age fast, but it ages at a faster pace than Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir is in the middle. So when the chef de cave is making up these blends of 50% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir, 5% Meunier, the Meunier is going to give it that little bit of approachability a little bit earlier. They know that the Chardonnay is going to make this wine a bottle that can actually age extensively, is what they're looking for, longevity. So ideally they want it to look beautiful on departure from the cellar or from the cave as soon as you get it. Often we let these wines, when they're vintage, to rest a bit before in our houses before we drink them. But when it's got Chardonnay, they know that it will age that little bit slower, and it gives you that little bit of safety net. You go, actually, I'm not sure when I'm going to drink that, but if I've got a selection of multiple vintages at my house and I'm not sure what I'm going to drink, I'll go for the Pinot Noir first, just because I think the Chardonnay is going to have that bit of freshness. And as an Australian, I demand freshness. I want freshness.
I think you're right. All the great aging wines of Champagne are Chardonnay driven, or sometimes Blanc de Blancs, which is 100% Chardonnay. This wine has had 5 to 6 years on its lees, so that's the rate at which they disgorge it and put it onto the market. And if you consider that this is now 8 years old, it's probably had at least a year, maybe 2 years on its cork before it comes to us, which is also a positive thing for a wine of its stature. A bit of time post-disgorgement adds a little extra.
I do think, especially when you're talking these sort of many, many years, when you open a bottle of vintage champagne, sometimes if you have the time, it's best to let it rest for a moment. If you think about it, if you sleep in a room and the window's closed, it's a stuffy room and you wake up and you're like, oh. So the same as with a wine, after 8 years of being aged in a bottle under a cork, it needs a little bit of air just to sort of refresh. Vintage champagne is the best because it has 8 years under cork. It hasn't had enough oxygen. It needs that little bit of time. Obviously, when you're in a restaurant, you just drink it straight away. So you'd probably go for maybe a larger glass, and definitely don't drink it too cold, particularly vintage champagne, because I think you miss the beauty of the wine. What this wine tastes like? I think it's a discreet wine, because we've just had a few wines that were quite powerful, quite big, quite bold, even though they're Chardonnay driven. This is 50% Chardonnay, and it has more of that refined sort of elegant note. A little bit of white nectarine for me. Floral notes, a little bit of citrus, almost that hint of lemongrass, which is that touch of freshness. And what I expect is really a little bit of that savoury characteristic after so much time on lees.
I get a little bit of butter and toast as well.
I think for me, almost that croissant sort of note.
Yes.
And there's a lovely sort of creamy texture on the palate. And the drive and the length, for me, it feels more than 50% Chardonnay because of that. But again, I get that little bit of mushroom sort of note that tells me there is a little bit of Pinot Noir. But I also get red apple, which when I have white nectarine and red apple, it sounds like two different levels of ripeness. But I think there's lovely sort of harmony with them. There's a lovely balance, and I think that that's really important, because you don't want yin and yang having a fight in the glass.
You don't want too tart green apple kind of thing.
No. I actually like green apple, but not tart green apple. It's degrees.
Sure.
And it's
but that wine, I think, needs to warm up a bit.
It's quite
a bit cold. It's a delicate wine, isn't it? It's not a big powerhouse of a wine, and it needs time to fill the glass up with aromas and soften.
I think that people miss out when they have this huge expectation. If you have a big Barossa Shiraz or you have a big vintage champagne, you expect it to be quite obvious and big and huge and, you know, shouting for attention. And I think that this is a more quiet wine, a more moderate wine. But the beauty is in the power and the concentration on the palate, because it's certainly there. It's just not being loud about it.
But it has power, but delivered with finesse, I think.
Absolutely.
It's graceful wine.
I think it's the difference between somebody yelling at you in another room or somebody whispering in your ear. And this is more of a whisper.
Yep, totally agree.
A whisper can still be powerful without being loud.
So how did we score this wine? Well, we scored it very well. We gave it 97 out of 100. And we've said, drink it now to 2025. Well, that's only 5 years hence. I'm sure it'll go for longer, but to be on the safe side, don't keep it too long. But I've got a fair idea this wine is going to live for quite a while yet, as long as it's well cellared. It is expensive. It's $350 a bottle, so you want to make sure you're drinking it at its absolute best. So I think any time between now and the next 5 years would be great. 97
out of 100 is an outstanding review. Outstanding.
It is, but we are talking about champagne, and we're talking about deluxe champagne, and the best of them should be 99 pointers.
Absolutely. For me, 97 points means it's part of the royal family of wine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we always ask the winemakers what they would recommend having with their wine, and these winemakers have said it would be perfect with a delicate white fish like sole. Well, I think that's true. We don't have a lot of sole in Australia, but we have a lot of whiting. I reckon whiting would be pretty good with it too. A white flesh fish, certainly, and delicately cooked and delicately sauced, because it is a delicate, restrained wine. But fish of any description, I think I can countenance that.
Absolutely. Even if you had a meaty fish, it would depend on how it's cooked in the garnish. If you're really quite discreet with the garnish and it's not being battered and deep fried, I think you could easily get away with it. You know, I'd love this with octopus on the barbecue or something. I think that would be great. Just freestyle something a little bit different.
Talking about sole and sauce, sole Meunier is
nice.
the simplest way to cook fish there is, and quite often the best when it comes to putting it with wine. And there's that word butter again, which butter always makes things better.
The secret to life is butter, salt, bacon and anchovies.
So,
cheers.
Good health.